I knew something was off the moment I saw the garage light flicker on through the side window at 2 in the afternoon, when I was supposed to be the only one home. I'm Xander Zolick, 38, EMT by trade, and a guy who just wants to come home to peace and quiet after 12-hour shifts. I'd been living in this neighborhood for 5 years without issue, until Felora Zimmerman got herself elected president of our HOA. Classic mid-50s control freak with a love for beige fences, exact trash bin placement, and talking down to everyone like we were her teenage kids. She even had the layered bob haircut to complete the Karen starter pack. But this was beyond her usual clipboard tyranny. I crept around the side of the house, quietly unholstering the pepper spray I kept in my work bag. I opened the side door to the garage and froze. There she was, Felora, inside my garage, digging through a box labeled winter gear like she owned the place. "What the hell are you doing in my garage?" I barked. Felora jumped, clutching her pearls like I'd just caught her robbing a bank. "Xander, you startled me. I was just..." "Inspecting. Inspecting what?" I asked, stepping closer. "You broke into my garage. That's trespassing." She had the nerve to wave her hand like I was being dramatic. "We had a complaint that someone was storing hazardous materials." "As HOA president, you have the authority to knock on my door, not break and enter." I pointed to the security camera above the workbench. "And now, you're on camera committing a felony." Felora's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I didn't give her a chance to come up with one of her usual passive-aggressive excuses. "Get out," I said, voice low but firm, "and don't touch anything else." She stormed out, heels clacking like a retreating raccoon in stilettos. As soon as she was gone, I locked the garage and reviewed the footage. There she was, clear as day, walking up to my side gate, using an old plastic card to jimmy it open, then entering the garage with gloves on and rifling through my stuff. I called the police. The responding officer was surprisingly enthusiastic once I showed him the footage. "You want to press charges?" "Absolutely," he nodded. "Trespassing, easy. She had no legal right to enter your property." Felora tried to play it off when the officer went to question her. "It's all a misunderstanding," she told him. "I was protecting the neighborhood. Didn't matter." The officer cited her right there on her perfect little porch, clipboard still in hand. The next day, I got a letter from the HOA signed by Felora herself claiming I was being fined for hostile behavior and failure to comply with HOA inspections. I laughed out loud. She'd just broken into my garage and now she was doubling down fine. If she wanted to play games, I'd play too. So I hired a lawyer. My attorney, Marla Keene, didn't waste time. I handed her the footage, the HOA's letter, and the police citation. She watched the video twice, her expression tightening with each minute. "She used gloves," Marla noted. "That's not someone checking for gas leaks. That's someone who didn't want to leave fingerprints." "She tried to fine me the next day," I said. "Claimed I was obstructing inspection procedures." Marla leaned back in her chair. "Then we'll let the court see how your inspection included breaking and entering. Give me a week." In the meantime, the HOA board acted like nothing had happened. At the next monthly meeting, which I attended out of pure curiosity, Felora sat at the head of the long, folding table in the community clubhouse like a queen presiding over a royal court. Her tone was icy, but she never once brought up the incident. Instead, she made a show of announcing new compliance measures. One of them was a proposed rule granting the HOA authority to conduct emergency inspections without notice, including entering detached structures if reasonable suspicion existed. A few heads in the room turned toward me. I didn't flinch. I had printed handouts. When it came time for resident commentary, I stood. "I have a quick question," I said, holding up a copy of the proposed rule. "Where in the HOA charter does it say the board can enter private property without consent?" Felora's jaw flexed. "The board is currently reviewing amendments to the charter." "Right, but until that's passed, it's not enforceable, and even if it were, it would still violate California Penal Code Section 602. That's criminal trespass." A few people murmured. A retired guy in the back nodded slowly. Felora's voice sharpened. "You're out of order, Xander. This isn't a courtroom," I said. "And even if it were, trust me, I'd still win." She moved to the next item without acknowledging me again, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. 3 days later, a notice was taped to my front door in a plastic sleeve. It was a formal notice of violation stating that my garage was under investigation for alleged fire code breaches. No evidence, no photos. Just a threat of a $500 fine if I didn't remedy the situation within 72 hours. Marla filed a restraining order that same afternoon. It was granted the next morning. The judge had barely glanced at the footage before signing it. "She opened your gate, entered your garage, and handled personal items," he said. "That's not oversight. That's criminal trespass, plain and simple." Felora was served the next day in front of the community clubhouse. I stood on my porch and watched her try to argue with the process server, who handed her the paperwork and walked away without a word. She didn't show up at the next board meeting. 2 weeks later, we were in court. Small claims, but the stakes were bigger than money. I was suing her personally, not as a representative of the HOA, for trespassing, invasion of privacy, and malicious prosecution related to the bogus fine. Felora's attorney, a wiry man with slicked-back hair and a perpetual frown, tried to argue that she had acted in the interest of community safety. Marla pounced. "Did she file a police report prior to entering my client's property? No. Did she have any documentation suggesting illegal activity? No. Did she notify the board before conducting this so-called inspection?" He shifted. "She believed immediate action was necessary." Marla turned to the judge. "She believed she could break into someone's garage, unannounced, alone, with gloves on, because she felt something might be wrong. That's not community service. That's criminal behavior." Felora tried to speak, but the judge held up a hand. "You'll have your turn." When it was hers, she leaned forward, eyes wide with rehearsed sincerity. "Your Honor, this neighborhood has had problems before. We've had renters bringing in chemicals, garages used as workshops. Were there any complaints filed about Mr. Zolick's property?" "No, but did he deny you entry when you knocked?" "I didn't knock. I assumed he wasn't home." The judge looked at her like she just admitted to stealing someone's car because the keys were left in it. Verdict came fast. Felora was ordered to pay me $2,000 in damages and issue a written apology within 10 days. The fine she had tried to impose was dismissed as retaliatory and unenforceable. But that wasn't even the best part. The court also ruled that she had overstepped her authority as HOA president and referred the matter to the state's Department of Consumer Affairs, which oversees homeowner associations. That meant a formal investigation into her leadership. Word got around fast. By the weekend, half the neighborhood had watched the courtroom footage I posted on our private community site. Someone even edited it into a highlight reel with dramatic music and slow-motion replays. I didn't ask who it just appeared overnight. The next wave hit on Monday. A group of residents, led by a retired paralegal named Mrs. Henders, called a special vote to remove Felora from her position as HOA president. They canvassed door to door with clipboards and copies of the court ruling. By Thursday, the signatures were in. At the emergency meeting, Felora tried to argue that the vote was invalid due to procedural errors. She hadn't even finished her sentence when Mrs. Henders stood up, documents in hand. "We followed every step in the bylaws. And these," she said, tapping the papers, "include a notarized affidavit from the court clerk confirming your misconduct." Felora's face went rigid. "I move to remove Felora Zimmerman from the board effective immediately," someone called out. "Seconded," came a chorus. The vote wasn't close. She stood up, stiffly collected her things, and walked out without a word. When she passed me, she didn't make eye contact. I didn't say a thing. But later that night, when I walked past the community bulletin board, her name had already been scratched off the list of board members. A new sheet had gone up titled Resident Rights and Protections. It was written in plain English, no legalese, and at the top it read, "No one enters your home without your permission. Ever," Marla called me the next morning. "Looks like your case might set precedent for similar HOA overreach across the county. I've gotten 3 calls already." "Glad to hear it," I said. "Maybe next time someone gets a clipboard and a God complex, they'll think twice." She laughed. You ever think of running for the board? Not a chance. I prefer my garage locked and my evenings quiet. Can't blame you there. We hung up. I spent the rest of the morning installing a new deadbolt on the side gate, not because I needed it anymore, but because it felt right. And as I tightened the last screw, I noticed something surprising. Neighbors walking by actually waved. One even stopped to ask about the brand of security camera I used. It wasn't just about me anymore. We'd taken back our neighborhood. And this time, the gates stayed shut. 2 weeks passed without a single HOA notice on my doorstep. The silence was almost eerie, like the calm after a storm that had ripped off the roof but left the foundation stronger. I spent most of my time off duty cleaning out the garage Felora had so graciously rummaged through. That single act, her stepping over the line, had cracked something wide open. The neighborhood wasn't just waking up, it was watching. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a typed list of names. Residents. About 20 of them, next to each name a dollar amount. At the bottom, reserve fund allocations Q2. I didn't know who sent it, but I knew what it was. The HOA's reserve fund wasn't supposed to be touched for anything except long-term maintenance, repaving roads, fixing communal structures, replacing signage. Yet here it was, plain as day. Thousands of dollars seemingly paid out to individual homeowners. I called Marla. "Do you recognize any of these names?" she asked. "Most of them voted against removing Felora," I said. "Some of them were the loudest defenders of that bogus inspection rule." Marla flipped through something on her end. None of these payments were in the HOA's last financial report. And by law, they're required to disclose all distributions. Could be hush money. Could also be fraud, she said, and then paused. "You still have that security camera footage?" "Yeah, good. We might need to establish a pattern." We didn't have to wait long. A week later, a new board member, Sanjay Mehta, a software engineer who lived across the street, knocked on my door. He looked uncomfortable, like someone who'd agreed to referee a knife fight. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. "Something's wrong with the books." He handed me a zip drive. "I dumped the raw accounting files from the HOA's shared Google Drive," he said. "I wasn't supposed to have access, but the admin password was still set to HOA 2020. You didn't get that from me." I plugged it into my laptop. Within minutes, Marla had the files too. She cross-referenced the numbers with the list I'd received. "Over $20,000 in unapproved transfers," she said. "Some labeled as maintenance bonuses, others just say community outreach. None of it was voted on. And at least 4 of the people on the list are related to Felora. Family members, 2 cousins, a niece, and her sister-in-law. That was enough to escalate. Marla submitted everything to the county auditor's office and the Department of Consumer Affairs. Within 72 hours, an investigator named Ruben Alvarez reached out. He'd been handling HOA compliance issues for over a decade. "I've seen some aggressive boards," he told me when we met at the community clubhouse, "but this is the first time someone's tried to run an HOA like a personal ATM." He didn't come alone. With him were 2 county financial auditors and a plainclothes officer from the district attorney's office. They showed up during the HOA's scheduled budget review meeting and asked for full access to all records, digital, paper, and banking. The acting board members were blindsided. Felora wasn't present, but her former treasurer, a man named Derek Cole, stammered through excuses about bookkeeping errors and temporary allocations. Ruben didn't respond. He just opened a folder, laid out 15 printed checks, all signed by Derek, and asked why 3 of them were made out to cash. No one had an answer. The audits took 2 weeks. During that time, residents whispered on sidewalks and watched from windows. One woman stapled a copy of the cash checklist to the communal notice board. Someone else added sticky notes next to each name with sarcastic captions like gutter consultant and emergency lawn specialist. When the final report came in, it was worse than we expected. The auditors found over $30,000 in misappropriated funds, unauthorized payments, duplicate reimbursements, even an invoice for a landscaping project that was never completed. The landscaper's signature had been forged. Rubin called it financial abuse of fiduciary duty. The DA called it criminal fraud. 3 arrests were made that week. Derek, the treasurer, Mona Hill, who'd been the secretary during Felora's tenure, and Felora herself, who was picked up at her sister-in-law's home in Santa Rosa after ignoring 3 subpoenas. The charges included embezzlement, falsification of financial records, and conspiracy to defraud. I watched the footage of her arrest on the local news. She looked stunned, standing barefoot in the doorway in a silk robe, trying to argue with the officers as they read her rights. This time, no clipboard, no pearls, just disbelief. At the next community meeting, Sanjay stood at the front with a new agenda: dissolve the existing HOA and replace it with a volunteer-run neighborhood committee. No dues, no fines, just a platform for communication and shared upkeep when needed. I've already spoken to legal counsel, he said. We can vote to dissolve under Clause 61 of the HOA Charter, majority rules. There wasn't a single dissenting vote. The transition took a month. During that time, I helped set up a digital portal where residents could post concerns, request help, or offer services. No one abused it. In fact, the first post was from a teenager offering to mow lawns for free while his dad recovered from surgery. It felt like a neighborhood again. Marla sent me a bottle of bourbon with a card that read, "This one's on Felora." I didn't drink it right away. Instead, I stored it in the garage, the same one she'd walked into thinking she ran the place. Now it was mine again, all of it was, and the lock still holds. The air felt lighter after the board dissolved, like a pressure valve had finally been released. For the first time in years, there were no passive-aggressive memos about mailbox paint, no roving compliance walks, and no one counting how many bags of mulch sat in your driveway. People were talking again like actual neighbors, not suspects under surveillance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. Maybe it was the way Derek Cole had looked when the officers took him away, too calm, almost relieved. Or maybe it was that during the audit, Rubin had mentioned something odd in passing about missing file logs from the HOA's server. Something about the way he said it stuck with me. I dug back into the flash drive Sanjay had handed me. Most of it was spreadsheets, but tucked away in a folder labeled Archive Old were PDFs of scanned letters, not financials correspondence. Mostly boring stuff. Notices about tree trimming, vendor bids, the occasional pest control invoice. But one stuck out. It was dated 6 months before the garage incident. Subject: proposed property line adjustment lot 41. Lot 41 was mine. The letter was from Mona Hill, the former secretary. It was addressed to the county assessor's office, requesting an update to the plat map to reflect a correction in boundary alignment between my property and the greenbelt behind it. The problem? There was no correction. That greenbelt had been designated as protected easement land since the development was built. I forwarded the document to Marla. Think this is what they were really after? I asked. She called 5 minutes later. They were trying to shrink your lot on paper, she said. If they'd succeeded, they could have claimed part of your backyard as HOA property. My stomach clenched, and the garage is close to that line. Exactly. Once it was inside the adjusted boundary, they could have claimed it violated setback rules. They'd have legal grounds to demand modifications or even removal. They were setting me up. They weren't just trespassing, Xander. They were laying a trap. She wasn't being dramatic. She was being thorough, and now we had motive. The letter had been signed using a digital stamp of Mona's signature. But when Rubin contacted the assessor's office, they confirmed something worse. Someone had followed up with a phone call impersonating me, confirming approval of the change. That tipped it from shady to criminal. Identity fraud, falsifying government records, attempted property theft. The DA reopened the case. I gave a full statement, and they subpoenaed the HOA's old internal server. With cooperation from the new committee, the IT consultant retrieved the server logs. They found the IP address that accessed the plat letter file and uploaded it to the assessor's online portal. It matched the home internet of Felora's niece, one of the same people who'd received money from the Community Outreach Fund. It unraveled fast after that. Turns out, this wasn't the only time. The DA's office found 2 other homeowners had similar letters submitted about boundary adjustments, both quietly shelved by the assessor due to missing confirming documents. Both properties bordered shared spaces. Felora and her inner circle hadn't just been embezzling. They were trying to annex land. When the charges came down, they weren't small time anymore. Felora was indicted on 6 counts: conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, falsification of public records, criminal trespassing, misappropriation of funds, and attempted grand theft of real property. Mona and Derek were hit with similar charges, along with Felora's niece, who was charged as a co-conspirator. The trial was scheduled for early fall. I was called as a witness. In court, my footage of the garage break-in was just the opening act. The prosecution built a methodical timeline, showing how their inspection was timed just weeks after the fake plat letter was submitted, and how the HOA board had quietly discussed reclaiming misused land in private emails afterwards. Those emails were recovered by the IT consultant and admitted into evidence. Felora's attorney tried to argue that the digital signature was accidentally used and that the phone call to the assessor was a miscommunication. But the DA dropped the hammer. They played a recorded call from the assessor's department in which a woman identifying herself as me stuttered through confirming the boundary change. The voice wasn't mine, not even close. It was Felora's niece, and she didn't even try to disguise it. When the jury came back, it took them less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Felora was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 2. Mona and Derek received 18 months each in county jail, with probation to follow. The niece received 12 months, suspended, and was ordered to pay restitution. After sentencing, the judge addressed the courtroom. This case is not just about trespassing or embezzlement, it's about abuse of power. These individuals took advantage of their positions to manipulate legal boundaries literally. They betrayed the trust of their neighbors and sought to rewrite reality for personal gain. When I walked out of the courthouse, the air smelled different, cleaner maybe. Or maybe I was just finally breathing again. The new neighborhood committee held a gathering the following weekend. No agenda, no votes, just a potluck in the community park. Kids played soccer, someone grilled hot dogs. A jazz trio from down the block set up near the swing sets. Sanjay came over with a paper plate loaded with samosas and handed me a lemonade. "Never thought I'd be part of a neighborhood that made statewide news," he said, half laughing. "Not exactly the fame I wanted," I said, "but I'll take justice over silence any day." He nodded toward the community board, where a new laminated poster had gone up. It read, "All committee actions require transparency, consent, and documentation. No exceptions." Next to it was a QR code linking to the digital ledger we now kept publicly accessible. Every dollar spent, every discussion logged, the garage, still locked, still mine. But now, no one was watching it from behind blinds or plotting to carve its foundation into a power grab. I finally felt like I lived in a neighborhood, not a territory. The bourbon Marla had sent didn't last long after the verdict. I cracked it open that night, toasted the empty driveway, and poured a second glass for the camera feed still running above my workbench. Because justice didn't just roll in on its own, I invited it in, made it a seat, and let it stay a while. And this time, the only thing entering my garage was peace.